Hey guys, tonight we're going to take you on a journey to one of America's most notorious prisons, Alcatraz. That chunk of rock sitting in the middle of San Francisco Bay that supposedly nobody ever escaped from. Well, spoiler alert, that's not entirely true, and you're about to find out why. Picture this, you're standing on Pier 33 in San Francisco on a foggy morning in 1962. The air tastes like salt and seaweed. You can hear the distant clang of a ferry bell cutting through the mist. In front of you, rising from the gray waters like something out of a Gothic novel, sits Alcatraz Island. Locals call it the Rock, and trust me, once you see it, you'll understand why. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe. But only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And hey, drop a comment letting me know what city you're listening from and what time it is where you are. I love knowing there are people all over the world settling in for these stories. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You're boarding the prison ferry now, and the engine thrums beneath your feet like a giant cat purring. The boat rocks gently as it pulls away from the dock. San Francisco shrinks behind you, its hills disappearing into the morning fog. Ahead, the rock grows larger with each passing minute. The ferry captain, a weathered man named Pete who's been making this run for 15 years, glances back at you. The first time he asks, his voice barely audible over the engine. You nod, he chuckles. Not a happy sound. Well, enjoy the ride. It's the easiest part. As you get closer, you start to make out details. The island is smaller than you expected. Just 22 acres. About the size of a city block. But what it lacks in size, it makes up for in intimidation. Gray concrete walls rise straight up from the water. Guard towers perch at strategic corners like stone sentinels. And at the top of the island, the main cell house looms like a cathedral of confinement. Here's something most people don't know: Alcatraz wasn't always a prison. Long before criminals called it home, the Ohlone people used this island as a fishing spot. They called it something that roughly translates to Place of the Pelicans. Imagine their peaceful fishing expeditions. The splash of oars in calm water, seabirds calling overhead. Hard to picture now, isn't it? The Spanish arrived in 1775 and renamed it Isla de los Alcatrazes, Island of the Pelicans. Lieutenant Juan Manuel de Ayala was the first European to sail into San Francisco Bay, and when he spotted this rocky outcrop covered in white birds, he probably thought it looked like a pretty decent place for a lighthouse. He had no idea he was naming what would become America's most famous prison. Your ferry bumps against the dock with a hollow thud. The sound echoes off the concrete walls surrounding you. Pete kills the engine, and suddenly the silence is overwhelming. No car horns, no city noise, just the lap of waves against rocks and the distant cry of seagulls. You step onto the dock, and immediately you feel it, the isolation. San Francisco sits right there, barely a mile and a half away. But it might as well be on another planet. The water between you and freedom is deceptively calm. But don't let that fool you. These currents have claimed more lives than anyone likes to count. A guard in a crisp uniform approaches. His keys jangle softly as he walks, a sound you'll learn to associate with authority here. "Welcome to Alcatraz," he says, but his tone suggests anything but welcome. Population: about 250 inmates, 60 guards and their families. Oh, and you might want to know, the water temperature stays around 50 degrees year-round. Most people can survive about 20 minutes in there before hypothermia sets in. He's not trying to scare you. He's just being practical. Because here's the thing about Alcatraz that makes it so perfectly diabolical. It doesn't need massive walls or electric fences. The Pacific Ocean is its wall, the currents are its guards, and the cold water, well, that's its executioner. As you walk up the winding path toward the main cell house, you can't help but wonder what kind of person ends up here. What do you have to do to earn a one-way ticket to the Rock? The answer, as you'll discover, isn't always what you'd expect. Behind you, Pete's ferry putters back toward San Francisco, carrying visitors and supplies. Its engine grows fainter until it's swallowed by the fog. And then you're truly alone with the island, about to step inside a world where time moves differently, where hope is measured in teaspoons, and where the most dangerous thing isn't the criminals. It's the dreams of escape that refuse to die. The massive steel door ahead of you swings open with a groan that sounds almost alive. Beyond it lies a maze of corridors, cells, and secrets that have been waiting decades to be told. You're stepping back in time now, to 1850, when Alcatraz was nothing more than a bare rock covered in bird droppings and the occasional seal. The California gold rush is in full swing, and San Francisco is exploding with fortune seekers, criminals, and dreamers. But someone in Washington has looked at this little island and seen something else entirely, the perfect place for a fort. You watch as the first military engineers arrive, their boots slipping on the guano-covered rocks. They're carrying surveying equipment and big dreams about turning this pelican playground into an impenetrable fortress. The irony isn't lost on you. They have no idea they're laying the foundation for what will become America's most famous prison. The work begins immediately. You see soldiers hauling massive granite blocks up from barges, their muscles straining against the weight. Each stone weighs several hundred pounds, and they're building everything by hand. No cranes, no modern machinery, just sweat, determination, and probably quite a bit of cursing that the history books don't record. Here's something that might surprise you. These weren't just any soldiers doing the construction. Many of them were military prisoners themselves, men who deserted or committed crimes while in uniform. So in a weird way, the first inmates of Alcatraz were actually building their own prison. They just didn't know it yet. You watch them work in the early morning fog, their breath visible in the cool air. The sound of hammers on stone echoes across the water like a giant clock ticking. Seagulls wheel overhead, probably wondering what these strange creatures are doing to their peaceful island. The fortress takes shape slowly. First come the gun emplacements, designed to sink any enemy ship that dares enter San Francisco Bay. You can almost hear the military planners congratulating themselves. No one will ever get past these cannons. They're thinking about foreign invaders, of course. Confederate ships, maybe. Or hostile nations trying to claim California's gold. But here's the delicious irony you're witnessing. While they're building walls to keep enemies out, they're actually creating the perfect structure to keep people in. Those thick stone walls, those narrow windows, that isolation, it's all going to work beautifully for a completely different purpose. By 1859, you're looking at an impressive fortress. The main building rises 3 stories, its windows facing inward toward a central courtyard. It looks almost like a monastery, which isn't entirely inappropriate given what's coming. The soldiers manning the guns peer out at the bay through narrow embrasures, watching for ships that will never come. Because here's what nobody expected: the fortress never fires a shot in anger. Not one. The Civil War rages from 1861 to 1865, and Alcatraz sits in the middle of San Francisco Bay, bristling with cannons, waiting for a battle that never arrives. It's like building the world's most elaborate mousetrap and discovering there are no mice. But the military isn't wasteful. If the fortress isn't going to fight enemies, it might as well hold prisoners. You watch as the first military criminals arrive. Deserters, mostly, and soldiers who couldn't keep their hands off other people's property. They're locked up in hastily converted gun rooms, sleeping on stone floors that were designed to hold ammunition. The transformation is gradual but inevitable. You see more cells being carved out of the fortress walls. Iron bars appear where cannon ports used to be. The courtyard that was meant for drilling soldiers becomes an exercise yard for prisoners. It's like watching a caterpillar turn into a butterfly. Except this butterfly has a taste for human misery. The guards develop routines that will persist for decades. Morning head count, work details, evening lockdown. The sound of keys becomes as regular as the tide. You notice how the isolation affects everyone differently. Some prisoners go quietly mad, staring at the water and counting waves. Others find peace in the rhythm of prison life, the certainty of knowing exactly what each day will bring. What strikes you most is how normal it all seems to become. Guards eat lunch while watching prisoners work. Seagulls still nest in the rocky crevices, unbothered by the human drama below. The fog rolls in every evening like clockwork, wrapping the island in a gray blanket that makes it disappear from the mainland. By the 1870s, you're looking at something that's no longer quite a fortress and not yet a proper prison. It's something in between, a military detention center that's evolving with each passing year. The guards' families live in houses built right on the island, their children playing in the shadow of the prison walls. It's the strangest neighborhood you can imagine. The original builders, those sweating soldiers who hauled granite blocks up from the water, could never have envisioned what their fortress would become. They built walls to protect America from its enemies. Instead, they created the perfect place to hide America from its criminals. And as you stand there in the evening fog, watching the lights of San Francisco twinkle across the water, you realize something profound. Sometimes the most important buildings are the ones that end up serving purposes completely different from what their creators intended. These stone walls that were meant to wage war will instead wage a different kind of battle, against hope, against freedom, against the very human desire to be anywhere but here. The fog thickens and Alcatraz disappears from the world once again, just as it has every night for decades. But inside those walls, time moves differently, and the story is just beginning. You're standing on the dock again, but this time it's August 11, 1934, and everything has changed. The morning air carries a different tension now, sharper, more electric. The military prisoners are long gone, shipped off to other facilities. What you're witnessing today is the birth of something entirely new, Alcatraz Federal Penitentiary. The first trainload of federal prisoners arrived at Tiburon this morning, and now you're watching them board a special prison barge. These aren't just any criminals. These are the men that other prisons couldn't handle, the troublemakers, the escape artists, the ones who turn places like Atlanta Federal Penitentiary and Leavenworth into their personal playgrounds. You count 14 men in the first group, all wearing identical gray uniforms and shackles that clink softly as they move. Their faces tell different stories. Some defiant, others resigned, a few genuinely curious about their new home. None of them are talking. The guards have made it very clear that the chatty phase of their journey is over. Here's something most people don't know. These first inmates weren't randomly selected. Each one was handpicked by the Bureau of Prisons as a test case. They wanted to see if Alcatraz could really live up to its reputation as escape-proof. It's like they were conducting the world's most expensive and dangerous experiment in human containment. The barge captain, a nervous man named Murphy, keeps checking his watch. He's never transported federal prisoners before, and the weight of responsibility shows in the way his hands shake slightly as he grips the wheel. Behind him, two heavily armed guards scan the water for any sign of trouble. They're not expecting a rescue attempt, but in this business, you prepare for everything. As the barge chugs across the bay, you notice how the prisoners react to their first glimpse of Alcatraz. A few lean forward, studying the island with professional interest. One man, you'll later learn his name is Al Capone, actually smiles. Not a happy smile, but the kind of expression a chess player makes when he sees an interesting new opponent. The approach to Alcatraz dock has been completely redesigned. Where military personnel once unloaded supplies with casual efficiency, you now see a gauntlet of security measures. Armed guards positioned at intervals, new steel barriers, motion sensors that weren't there during the Army days. Someone has clearly spent a lot of time thinking about how to make this 30-second walk from boat to prison as secure as possible. Warden James Johnston waits at the top of the dock, clipboard in hand, looking like a school principal about to welcome the world's most dangerous class. Johnston isn't your typical prison warden. He's a progressive reformer who believes in rehabilitation through discipline. He has no idea that some of these men view his carefully planned system as nothing more than an elaborate puzzle to solve. You follow the prisoners up the winding path to the cell house, and immediately you notice the changes. The old fortress has been gutted and rebuilt from the inside. Where cannon emplacements once pointed toward the bay, you now see barred windows that let in just enough light to remind inmates what they're missing. The transformation is complete. This is no longer a fort defending America. It's a vault storing America's most dangerous men. The main cell house door swings open with a sound like thunder. Inside, the acoustics are incredible. Every footstep, every cough, every whispered word echoes off the concrete walls and steel bars. The prisoners instinctively lower their voices, as if the building itself is listening. You're looking at 336 cells arranged in 4 blocks, labeled A through D. Each cell is exactly 5 feet by 9 feet, smaller than most people's bathrooms. A fold-down bunk, a small shelf, a toilet, and a tiny sink. That's it. That's home for however long the federal government decides these men need to think about their life choices. What strikes you most is the silence. In other prisons, there's constant chatter, the buzz of conversation that comes when you put hundreds of people in close quarters. Not here. The acoustics make private conversation impossible, so the inmates have already learned to communicate through glances, gestures, and the subtle art of reading facial expressions. Here's a detail that the newspapers never mentioned. The cells don't have bars facing the corridor like in old Western movies. Instead, they have solid steel doors with small observation windows. It's more like a bank vault than a traditional jail cell. The message is clear. You're not just locked up, you're sealed away. The first night is always the hardest, and you can feel the psychological weight settling over these men like a heavy blanket. Outside their tiny windows, San Francisco glitters in the distance, close enough to see individual buildings, far enough away to be completely unreachable. It's a special kind of torture, designed by architects who understood that hope can be more painful than despair. But here's what the planners didn't anticipate. Criminals are problem solvers by nature. Put them in an impossible situation, and their first instinct isn't to give up. It's to start looking for weaknesses. As these 14 men settle into their cells on that first night, some of them are already studying the walls, listening to the sounds, feeling for loose stones or weak joints. The guards make their rounds every hour, flashlights cutting through the darkness like tiny suns. Their footsteps echo in the corridors, a rhythm that will become as familiar as a heartbeat. In cell B206, a man named Roy Gardner, notorious train robber, lies on his bunk and counts the seconds between guard passes. In cell C102, bank robber Harvey Bailey examines the ventilation grate above his head with professional interest. They don't know it yet, but they're laying the groundwork for legends. Some will break under the pressure of isolation. Others will find ways to make Alcatraz work for them. And a very few, will discover that escape-proof is more of a marketing slogan than a guarantee. As the lights go out and the island settles into its first night as a federal penitentiary, you can almost feel the wheels turning in a dozen different minds, each one starting to ask the same fundamental question. How do you get off a rock in the middle of the ocean when everyone is watching? You're walking through the cell house in March 1935. And there's a buzz of excitement that the guards can't quite suppress. Word has spread through the prison grapevine. America's most famous gangster is coming to Alcatraz. Al Capone, the man who owned Chicago, who made millions from bootleg liquor, who seemed untouchable for so long, is about to become prisoner 85. But here's the thing that's going to surprise you. The Al Capone who shuffles off the prison barge looks nothing like the swaggering crime boss from the newspapers. He's 36 years old, overweight, and there's something different about his eyes. A vagueness that suggests his mind isn't quite as sharp as it used to be. What nobody knows yet is that syphilis is slowly eating away at his brain, turning the once brilliant criminal mastermind into a shadow of his former self. You watch as he's processed through the same routine as every other prisoner. Strip search, delosing shower, standard issue gray uniform. The guards treat him with professional courtesy, but there's no special deference. That's the first lesson of Alcatraz. Your reputation means nothing once you walk through that door. His cell is B181, right in the middle of the cell house where everyone can see him. This isn't an accident. Warden Johnston has specifically placed Capone where his presence will be most visible and most ordinary. The message to other inmates is clear. If we can reduce Al Capone to just another number, what chance do you think you have? The first few days are rough for Capone. You can see him struggling with the silence rule, trying to strike up conversations during work detail or in the dining hall. Back in Chicago, he was never without an audience. Reporters, bodyguards, hangers on who hung on his every word. Now when he tries to tell stories about the old days, guards shut him down immediately. Here's something that would have shocked his enemies back in Chicago. Al Capone becomes a model prisoner almost immediately. Not because he's reformed, but because prison routine actually suits his deteriorating mental state. Wake up at 6:30, work in the laundry 3 meals a day, lights out at 9:30. For a brain slowly succumbing to disease, this predictability is almost comforting. You notice how the other inmates react to him. Some are genuinely star-struck. They're sharing space with a living legend, a man whose exploits filled newspaper headlines for years. Others are more pragmatic. They watch him carefully, looking for signs of weakness, wondering if the famous Al Capone might be useful for their own schemes. But as the months pass, you see Capone's legend slowly deflating like a punctured balloon. He's assigned to mop floors and clean bathrooms, unglamorous work that nobody back in Chicago would have ever imagined their crime boss doing. His hands, once manicured and adorned with expensive rings, now sport calluses and cleaning chemical burns. The isolation affects him differently than other prisoners. While some men rage against the silence, Capone seems almost relieved by it. You catch him sometimes, standing at his cell window, staring across the bay toward San Francisco with a dreamy expression. It's as if he's already somewhere else, lost in memories of speakeasies and jazz clubs that no longer exist. Here's a detail that the newspapers never reported. Capone becomes genuinely popular with some of the guards' families. During the evening exercise periods, when inmates are allowed in the recreation yard, he sometimes plays catch with a tennis ball, moving slowly but with obvious enjoyment. The guards' children, watching from their apartment windows, wave at him. He always waves back, his face lighting up with something approaching genuine happiness. Dr. George Hess, the prison physician, starts noticing troublings during Capone's medical exams. Memory lapses, difficulty concentrating, occasional outbursts of temper followed by periods of childlike confusion. The great criminal mind that once orchestrated the Valentine's Day massacre is slowly unraveling, one synapse at a time. You're there the day Capone has his first major breakdown. It's during a routine cell inspection, and suddenly he's screaming about invisible enemies, throwing his few possessions around the tiny space, completely convinced that rival gangs have infiltrated Alcatraz to kill him. It takes 4 guards to restrain him, and afterwards, he sits on his bunk crying like a lost child. The incident changes how everyone sees him. The tough guys who once competed for his attention now avoid him, embarrassed by his weakness. The guards start treating him more like a confused elderly relative than a dangerous criminal. Even Warden Johnston, who prided himself on treating all inmates equally, begins making small allowances for Capone's deteriorating condition. But here's what's really heartbreaking. In his lucid moments, Capone seems to understand what's happening to him. You catch him sometimes, late at night, pressing his face against the bars of his cell window, tears streaming down his cheeks as he stares at the lights of San Francisco. He knows he's losing himself piece by piece, and there's nothing anyone can do to stop it. His family visits become increasingly painful to witness. His wife May sits across from him in the visiting room, trying to have normal conversations while he drifts in and out of coherence. She brings news from Chicago, updates about their son Sonny, but you can see in her eyes that she's already mourning the man he used to be. By 1938, 4 years into his sentence, Al Capone is barely recognizable as the crime boss who once terrorized Chicago. He spends most of his time in the prison library, reading comic books and children's stories, his lips moving as he sounds out the words. The guards have stopped seeing him as a security risk. How do you escape from prison when you can barely remember your own name? The irony isn't lost on you. Alcatraz was designed to break the spirits of America's most dangerous criminals. But in Capone's case, it wasn't the isolation or the harsh conditions that defeated him. It was his own body, slowly betraying the mind that had made him famous. The rock didn't need to crush Al Capone. It just had to wait. You're waking up to the sound of a bell that cuts through your dreams like a knife. It's 6:30 a.m. on Alcatraz. And whether you're serving 5 years or 50, this bell owns your life now. The sound echoes off the concrete walls and steel bars, bouncing around the cell house until it seems to come from everywhere at once. You swing your legs over the side of your narrow bunk, feet touching the cold concrete floor. Your cell is exactly 5 feet by 9 feet. You've measured it 100 times during sleepless nights. Everything you own in the world fits on a single shelf: 1 cup, 1 bowl, 1 spoon, a few books if you're lucky, maybe a photograph that's been examined by guards so many times the faces are starting to fade. The morning routine is sacred here, choreographed down to the second. You dress quickly in your standard issue gray uniform, pants, shirt, shoes that never quite fit right. No belt, no shoelaces, nothing that could become a weapon or a noose. The prison has thought of everything, including things you never would have considered. Cell doors slide open with a mechanical clang that reverberates through your bones. You step out into the corridor and immediately fall into line with the other inmates. No talking, no eye contact, just the shuffle of feet and the jingle of keys as guards watch your every move. Here's something that surprises most people. Breakfast at Alcatraz is actually pretty good. Not gourmet, obviously, but filling and nutritious. You get oatmeal, toast, coffee that's strong enough to wake the dead, and sometimes even fruit. The prison administrators learned early that hungry men are desperate men, and desperate men cause problems. You eat in silence, surrounded by 50 other inmates, but you might as well be dining alone. The no-talking rule during meals isn't just about control, it's about psychology. Food should be a social experience, a time for conversation and connection. Take that away, and you're slowly erasing one of the most basic human pleasures. After breakfast comes work assignment, and this is where you discover that Alcatraz runs like a small city. Someone has to do the laundry for 300 people. Someone has to prepare 3 meals a day. Someone has to maintain the buildings, repair the equipment, keep the generators running. The prison doesn't just contain you, it needs you. You might find yourself in the kitchen, preparing lunch for inmates who will eat it in the same silence you experienced at breakfast. The work is surprisingly satisfying, chopping vegetables, stirring enormous pots of soup, baking hundreds of loaves of bread. Your hands stay busy, and for a few hours you can almost forget where you are. Or maybe you're assigned to the laundry, where the air is thick with steam and the smell of industrial detergent. The washing machines are ancient, temperamental beasts that require coaxing and occasional threats to keep working. You develop a strange relationship with these machines. They're as trapped on the island as you are, grinding through the same routine day after day. The lucky ones work in the library, a surprisingly well-stocked room with thousands of books, magazines, and newspapers. Here, behind bars but surrounded by words, you can travel to places the prison walls can't contain. You can spend an afternoon in Victorian London with Dickens, or explore the American frontier with Zane Grey. It's the closest thing to escape that Alcatraz allows. But here's what the guidebooks never mention. The hardest part of prison life isn't the confinement or the rules or even the occasional violence. It's the boredom. Hours stretch like taffy, minutes crawling by with agonizing slowness. You learn to count things: steps in your cell, bricks in the wall, seagulls outside your window. You develop elaborate mental routines to make time pass, creating entire worlds inside your head where you're free to come and go as you please. Lunch arrives at exactly 11 at 4:30. Same routine, same silence, Same mechanical consumption of calories, designed to keep you alive but not necessarily happy. You notice how inmates develop rituals around these meals. Always sitting in the same spot, eating in the same order, saving the best bite for last. Small rebellions against a system designed to eliminate choice. Evenings are the worst. After dinner, you're locked in your cell until morning, alone with your thoughts and regrets. This is when the walls really start closing in, when the weight of your sentence feels heaviest. Outside your window, you can see the lights of San Francisco twinkling like stars, each one representing a life you can't touch, a freedom you can't taste. Some inmates exercise in their cells, doing push-ups and sit-ups until exhaustion finally brings sleep. Others read by the dim light of a single bulb, losing themselves in stories of adventure and romance. A few just lie on their bunks and stare at the ceiling, counting the hours until morning releases them into another identical day. The guards make their rounds every hour, flashlight beams cutting through the darkness like lighthouse sweeps. You learn to time your movements around these checks, to appear asleep even when your mind is racing, to master the art of looking peaceful while feeling anything but. But here's the strange thing about routine: eventually, it becomes comforting. After months or years of the same schedule, the same faces, the same gray walls, you start to find security in the predictability. The bell that once jolted you awake becomes familiar music. The silence that once drove you crazy becomes a kind of peace. You realize that Alcatraz isn't just punishing you for your past crimes. It's rewiring your brain, teaching you to find satisfaction in small things. A letter from home, a good book, a day when the fog clears enough to see the Golden Gate Bridge gleaming in the distance. And as you drift off to sleep, listening to the foghorns and the waves, you understand something profound. The human spirit is remarkably adaptable. You can cage the body, but the mind finds ways to soar, even when surrounded by bars and concrete and the endless, patient ocean. You're walking past cell D42, and if you didn't know better, you'd think the man inside was just another lifer serving his time quietly. He's tall, thin, with wire-rimmed glasses that give him the look of a college professor. He spends most of his days reading, writing letters, and working in the prison hospital. The other inmates call him Doc, and he seems harmless enough. His name is Robert Franklin Stroud, and he's about to become the most famous prisoner Alcatraz never wanted. Here's the thing that's going to blow your mind. Everything you think you know about the Birdman of Alcatraz is wrong. That movie with Burt Lancaster. Pure Hollywood fiction. Stroud never kept birds on Alcatraz, not a single feather. He never conducted groundbreaking ornithological research from his cell. And he definitely wasn't the gentle, misunderstood scholar that Hollywood made him out to be. You're witnessing one of the greatest public relations disasters in prison history. And it all started with a lie that got completely out of control. Let's go back to where this myth began. Before Alcatraz, Stroud spent 30 years at Leavenworth Federal Penitentiary in Kansas. It was there, in 1920, that he found a nest of baby sparrows in the prison yard. On a whim, he decided to raise them. That small act of kindness grew into an obsession that would define his life, and eventually create a legend that bore no resemblance to reality. At Leavenworth, Stroud really did become an expert on birds. His cell was filled with canaries, sparrows, and finches. He bred them, studied them, and even wrote 2 books about bird diseases. He was genuinely knowledgeable, genuinely passionate, and for a brief moment in his violent life, genuinely peaceful. But here's what the movie never told you: Robert Stroud was a killer. Not once, but twice. He murdered a bartender in Alaska in 1909, stabbed a fellow inmate at Leavenworth in 1916, and then, in the most shocking incident of all, killed a prison guard in front of 100 witnesses in the Leavenworth dining hall in 1916. This wasn't a man driven to violence by circumstances. This was a predator who happened to like birds. You watch him now in his Alcatraz cell, and you can see why the myth developed. He looks scholarly, almost fragile. He writes constantly, letters to lawyers, appeals to courts, manuscripts about prison reform. He's articulate, intelligent, and completely convinced of his own innocence. It's easy to forget that this mild-mannered man once drove a knife into a guard's heart in front of hundreds of prisoners. When Stroud arrived at Alcatraz in 1942, Warden Johnston made one thing crystal clear: no birds. The man who had become famous for his feathered friends would never again be allowed near so much as a parakeet. It was a cruel but necessary decision. Stroud's bird research at Leavenworth had become a cover for drug smuggling and black market activities. Those innocent canaries were carrying more than just birdseed. But Stroud adapted. Without birds to study, he threw himself into legal research, spending 18 hours a day poring over law books, filing appeals, writing letters to anyone who might listen. His cell became a one-man law firm. Papers stacked from floor to ceiling, legal briefs covering every surface. He was fighting for his freedom with the same intensity he'd once devoted to breeding canaries. Here's where the story gets really interesting. Stroud never gave up hope that his birds made him special, that his ornithological expertise somehow justified his crimes or at least mitigated his punishment. In letter after letter, he portrayed himself as a misunderstood scientist, a man whose contributions to bird medicine outweighed his violent past. You can see how the guards react to him. Some genuinely like Stroud. He's polite, well-read, and never causes trouble. Others see right through the scholarly facade to the killer underneath. There's something unsettling about watching him work in the prison hospital. His gentle hands treating sick inmates while you remember those same hands plunging a knife into a man's chest. The transformation of Robert Stroud from convicted murderer to folk hero happened gradually, then all at once. Journalists started writing sympathetic pieces about the brilliant ornithologist locked away in Alcatraz. Prison reform advocates held him up as an example of rehabilitation. Hollywood producers saw a story that would tug at heartstrings and sell tickets. What none of them bothered to mention was that Stroud hadn't touched a bird in over 20 years. You're there the day a reporter visits, hoping to interview the famous birdman. He's disappointed to find no birds, no laboratory, no sign of the scientific research he'd read about. But Stroud is a master manipulator, and within minutes he's spinning tales about his past work, dropping scientific terms like breadcrumbs, painting himself as a victim of a vindictive justice system. The reporter leaves convinced he's met a wronged man, a genius trapped by bureaucratic cruelty. The resulting article furthers the myth, adding new layers of fiction to an already distorted story. Each retelling makes Stroud more sympathetic, more brilliant, more deserving of freedom. But here's what you see that the reporters miss: Stroud's complete lack of remorse for his actual crimes. He'll talk for hours about bird anatomy or prison conditions, but ask him about the men he killed, and his eyes go cold. He doesn't deny the murders, but he doesn't accept responsibility either. They were necessary. He claims self-defense, justifiable homicide. The real tragedy isn't that Robert Stroud was locked away from his birds. The real tragedy is that a multiple murderer became a symbol of redemption he never actually achieved. He spent 54 years in prison, 42 of them in solitary confinement, and never once expressed genuine sorrow for taking 2 lives. As you watch him now, carefully writing another legal brief in his neat handwriting, you realize something profound about the power of narrative. Tell a story often enough, dress it up with enough appealing details, and it becomes more real than reality. The Birdman of Alcatraz exists, just not in the way most people think. The man in cell D42 is just Robert Stroud, aging lifer, brilliant manipulator, and the star of a legend he spent his entire life trying to make true. You're living in one of the strangest neighborhoods in America, and most people don't even know it exists. While tourists gaze at Alcatraz from Fisherman's Wharf and imagine nothing but concrete cells and hardened criminals, you're part of a secret community, the families of the guards who call the Rock home. Your apartment is in Building 64, a 3-story structure that looks like it could house middle-class families anywhere in America. Except for the armed guards at every entrance and the fact that your backyard is a maximum security prison. You wake up each morning to the sound of the 6:30 a.m. bell, The same bell that rouses tutti 50 of the country's most dangerous criminals just a few hundred yards away. Here's what blows your mind. Living on Alcatraz as a guard's kid is actually pretty amazing. The island is your private playground. You have beaches that no other children in San Francisco can access. You climb rocks that have never felt tourist feet. You explore caves and hidden coves that exist on no guidebook. It's like having your own personal island adventure, with the small caveat that it's surrounded by maximum security. You attend school in the old army chapel, converted into a classroom that serves about 15 children ranging from kindergarten through 8th grade. Mrs. Burgeon is your teacher, and she handles all grades simultaneously with a skill that would impress any educator. The classroom windows look out over San Francisco Bay, and on clear days you can see the city's children walking to schools that seem impossibly far away. Your classmates are an interesting bunch. There's Tommy, whose father works the night shift in the gun towers, Sarah, whose dad runs the prison kitchen, little Bobby, whose mother helps coordinate family visits. You all share the peculiar bond of having maximum security prison as your home address. But somehow it feels completely normal because it's all you've known. Recess is unlike anywhere else in the world. You play tag around the base of guard towers, toss balls in the shadow of prison walls, and develop elaborate games that incorporate the unique geography of your island home. Hide and seek is particularly interesting when you have concrete fortifications and abandoned military structures to explore. Here's something that would surprise most people: the inmates love watching you play. During their exercise periods, they gather at the windows facing the residential area and wave at the children. You wave back without thinking twice about it. These men in gray uniforms are just part of the landscape, like the seagulls or the fog that rolls in each evening. Your parents work hard to maintain the illusion of normalcy. Birthday parties happen in the community center, complete with cake and decorations and games. Halloween means trick or treating from apartment to apartment, with guards and their spouses handing out candy while dressed as cowboys and pirates. Christmas brings a tree to the community center and presents that had to be inspected by security before being wrapped. But normal has a different meaning when your playground is surrounded by razor wire. You learn early not to wander into certain areas, not because they're dangerous to you, but because your presence might compromise security. You understand that some conversations stop when children enter the room. You develop an instinctive awareness of which topics are safe for school reports and which ones might upset the teacher. The boat is your lifeline to the outside world. 3 times a week, it carries supplies, mail, and people to and from San Francisco. You ride it to dental appointments, shopping trips, and visits with relatives who live in that strange place called the mainland. The 15-minute journey feels like traveling between planets. One moment you're on a maximum security island, the next you're in one of America's great cities. Shopping trips are adventures in reverse culture shock. You wander through department stores that seem impossibly large after the intimate scale of island life. You see children your age who seem worldly and sophisticated in ways you can't quite understand. They talk about television shows you've never seen, movies that don't make it to the island's small theater, experiences that exist outside your fortress community. But here's the thing, you don't feel deprived. If anything, you feel special. How many kids can say they live on an island? How many have their own private beaches, their own fortress to explore? How many grow up with such a clear understanding of right and wrong, with such intimate knowledge of consequences and justice? Your father comes home from work with stories he can't tell, carrying stress he can't fully explain. You learn to read his moods, to know when his shift was difficult, when the prisoners were restless, when something happened that he'll never discuss at the dinner table. Prison work follows him home in ways that are invisible but unmistakable. The other families become extended relatives. Mrs. Patterson babysits when your parents need a night out. Richie treats your scraped knees and childhood illnesses with the same hands that tend to dangerous criminals. Officer Milano teaches you to fish from the rocky shores, patient and kind despite the stress of his job. Evening entertainment is creative and communal. Adults gather for card games and conversation while children play elaborate games of imagination. Someone has a guitar, someone else tells stories, and occasionally a guard with a good voice leads impromptu singing. It's like summer camp that never ends. Except summer camp doesn't usually include armed sentries and searchlights. You develop a peculiar relationship with danger that will serve you well in adult life. Risk is manageable, you learn. Rules exist for good reasons. Authority figures can be trusted when they're doing their jobs properly. These lessons are absorbed through daily experience rather than lectures, making them more powerful than any parent's warnings. As you grow older, you start to understand that your childhood was extraordinary. Not everyone gets to grow up in a place where the stakes are so high, where the line between safety and danger is so clearly marked, where community bonds are forged by shared isolation and common purpose. The fog rolls in each evening like a soft gray blanket, wrapping your island home in familiar silence. Lights come on in apartment windows, homework gets finished at kitchen tables, and parents tuck children into beds happen to sit in the shadow of America's most famous prison. And somehow, incredibly, it all feels perfectly, beautifully normal. You're standing in the heart of Alcatraz's most dangerous room, and it doesn't look dangerous at all. The kitchen is bright, clean, and filled with the comforting sounds of institutional cooking. Bubbling pots, sizzling pans, the rhythmic chop of knives through vegetables. Steam rises from enormous vats of soup, and the smell of fresh bread drifts from industrial ovens. It's almost homey, if you can ignore the armed guards watching from the corners, and the fact that every knife is chained to the counters. Here's what most people don't realize: the kitchen is where escape plots are born. Not in the cells, not in the yard, but right here among the flour sacks and soup ladles, where inmates work side by side for hours, their voices masked by the clatter of pots and the hiss of steam. If you want to plan something illegal on Alcatraz, you do it while peeling potatoes. You're assigned to the breakfast crew, which means your day starts at 4 a.m., 2.5 hours before the rest of the prison wakes up. In the prawn darkness, you and 20 other inmates shuffle into the kitchen under the watchful eyes of guards, who are still nursing their first cups of coffee. The fluorescent lights buzz to life, illuminating stainless steel surfaces that reflect your movements like funhouse mirrors. The head cook is an inmate named Charlie, serving 25 years for bank robbery, who's turned prison cooking into an art form. He's been here 8 years, long enough to know every recipe by heart, every shortcut that keeps 250 hungry men fed and reasonably happy. Charlie runs his kitchen like a Swiss watch, barking orders with military precision while never raising his voice above a conversational tone. You learn quickly the kitchen has its own hierarchy, its own rules, its own complex social dynamics. The meat cutters are at the top. They handle the knives, they control the protein, they have access to tools that could theoretically be weapons. Below them are the bakers, the soup stirrers, the dishwashers. Everyone knows their place. And crossing territorial lines can lead to problems that the guards might never see coming. But here's where it gets interesting. The kitchen is also where information flows. While you're kneading bread dough, the inmate next to you might casually mention that guard Patterson always checks the same cell first during night rounds. While chopping onions, someone might observe that the ventilation system in Block B makes strange noises between 2 and 3 a.m. These aren't casual observations. They're intelligence-gathering operations disguised as small talk. You notice how certain inmates gravitate toward specific jobs. The ones working near the loading dock can observe supply deliveries, noting schedules and security procedures. The dishwashers have access to the rear of the kitchen, where they can study the building's construction without appearing suspicious. Even the garbage detail becomes strategic when you realize they're learning the island's waste disposal systems. The genius of it all is that the kitchen work provides perfect cover for conspiracy. Guards expect inmates to talk about recipes, to discuss meal planning, to coordinate food preparation. What they don't necessarily catch is when "how much flour do we need?" becomes code for "how many guards are on duty?" Or when arguments about seasoning mask debates about escape timing. You're stirring an enormous pot of oatmeal when Frank Morris strikes up a conversation. He's new to the kitchen detail, recently transferred from another federal prison, and he asks seemingly innocent questions about everything. How hot do the ovens get? Where do the supply trucks park? What time does the staff switch shifts? His curiosity seems natural. Every new inmate wants to understand their environment. But you start to notice patterns in Frank's questions. He's particularly interested in the physical structure of the building, the schedule of deliveries, the routines of the guards. He volunteers for cleanup duties that take him into storage areas and utility rooms. He's always the first to offer help when equipment needs repair, giving him access to tools and hidden spaces that most inmates never see. Here's something that would have shocked the prison administrators. Some of the most detailed intelligence about Alcatraz security comes from the kitchen staff. They know which guards carry keys, which ones are easily distracted, which shifts are understaffed. They've observed delivery patterns, studied architectural drawings left carelessly on desks, memorized the timing of everything from mail delivery to garbage pickup. The Anglin brothers, John and Clarence, work the breakfast line, and they've turned their assignment into an advanced course in prison logistics. They know exactly how many meals are prepared each day, which means they know the exact inmate count. They've noticed discrepancies in food orders that suggest the prison sometimes holds temporary inmates who don't appear on official rosters. They've even figured out which guards eat in the staff cafeteria and which ones bring lunch from home. You're amazed by the level of detail these men absorb while appearing to focus solely on food preparation. The temperature of the walk-in refrigerator, the location of every electrical outlet, the thickness of the walls, the schedule of maintenance workers. Everything becomes potentially useful information when you're planning the impossible. The kitchen also serves as a communication hub for the entire prison. Inmates from different cell blocks work together here, sharing information that would be impossible to exchange elsewhere. A man from Block can relay messages to someone in Block D simply by passing along recipe instructions. The soup of the day might carry more than just nutritional information. But here's what makes the kitchen truly dangerous from a security standpoint. It's where inmates learn to work as a team. Preparing meals for 250 people requires coordination, timing, and trust. Men who might never speak to each other in the yard learn to anticipate each other's movements, to cover for each other's mistakes, to function as a unit. These skills transfer seamlessly to more illicit activities. As you finish your shift and head back to your cell, you realize you've spent the morning in the most subversive classroom on Alcatraz. You've learned about ventilation systems, guard schedules, supply deliveries, and building maintenance, all while making breakfast. The kitchen isn't just feeding bodies, it's nourishing escape plans, one meal at a time. The irony is perfect. The room designed to sustain life on Alcatraz has become the place where dreams of freedom simmer alongside the morning coffee. You're lying on your cell bunk on May 2, 1946, when the normal sounds of Alcatraz suddenly change. Instead of the usual clatter of meal preparation and guard conversations, you hear something that makes your blood run cold, the sharp crack of gunfire echoing through the cell house corridors. What started as another routine day is about to become the most violent 48 hours in Alcatraz history. The trouble began in the prison industries building, where inmates Bernie Coy, Joe Kretzer, and Marvin Hubbard were supposed to be working quietly. Instead, they've been planning something that most experts thought was impossible, a violent takeover of America's most secure prison. You hear shouting, the clang of cell doors, and the unmistakable sound of men running where men should never be allowed to run. Here's what you piece together from the chaos. Bernie Coy has somehow squeezed through the bars of the gun gallery. a feat that should have been physically impossible for a man of his size. But Koi has been losing weight deliberately, starving himself for months to make his body thin enough to slip through an opening that was supposed to be escape-proof. It's the kind of long-term planning that gives prison administrators nightmares. From your cell, you can hear the battle unfolding in stages. First, the inmates overpower Officer William Miller in the gun gallery, taking his keys and weapons. The sound of the struggle is brief but terrifying. Furniture crashing, men shouting, then an ominous silence that tells you the guards have lost the first round. You press against your cell door, trying to see what's happening in the corridor. Through the small window, you catch glimpses of inmates moving freely through areas they should never access. They're not just escaping, they're trying to take control of the entire cell house. It's every prison guard's worst fear come to life. The inmates have hostages now: Officers Miller, Burdett, Bristow, and Corwin. These are men you've seen every day for years. Guards who've treated you fairly, who have families waiting for them at home. Hearing their voices mixed with the shouts of desperate criminals makes your stomach churn with a fear you've never experienced before. Here's where the plan starts falling apart. The inmates can't find the key that opens the recreation yard door. Without access to the yard, they can't reach the boats at the dock. Without boats, they can't get off the island. What began as a carefully orchestrated escape is turning into a deadly siege with nowhere to go. You hear Joe Kretzer's voice rising above the others, and it's filled with a rage that chills you. Kretzer has a life sentence and nothing left to lose. If he can't escape, he's apparently decided that killing guards is an acceptable consolation prize. The sound of gunshots rings out again, and you realize that men are dying just yards from your cell. The prison's alarm system starts wailing, a sound you've heard in drills but never during an actual emergency. Outside your window, you can see guards running across the island, taking positions with military precision. Reinforcements are arriving from the mainland: police, federal agents, even military personnel. The rock is under siege from both inside and out. Officer Harold Stites tries to retake the cell house and is shot down in the corridor. You can hear him calling for help, his voice growing weaker as blood seeps across the concrete floor. The sound of a dying man echoes off the walls like a prayer in a cathedral, and you understand that this situation has moved far beyond escape attempts into something much darker. The shooting continues sporadically through the night. Every gunshot makes you flinch, wondering if another guard has been killed, if the violence is spreading, if the inmates might decide to start executing prisoners who refuse to join their cause. Sleep is impossible. You lie on your bunk staring at the ceiling, listening to a battle that sounds like war. By the second day, you can smell smoke drifting through the ventilation system. The inmates have started fires, either as a distraction or simply as another weapon in their desperate arsenal. The acrid smell mixes with gunpowder and fear, creating an atmosphere that feels apocalyptic. Here's what makes the situation truly terrifying. The inmates holding the cell house have nothing left to lose. Bernie Coy knows he'll face the electric chair if captured alive. Joe Kretzer is already serving multiple life sentences. They're fighting like cornered animals, and cornered animals are the most dangerous creatures on Earth. You hear explosions now, grenades being used to flush the inmates out of their strongholds. The military has arrived with serious firepower, treating this not as a prison riot but as an armed insurrection. The walls shake with each detonation, and plaster dust rains down from the ceiling like snow. The end comes suddenly. After 48 hours of violence, the gunfire stops. The silence that follows is somehow more frightening than the battle itself. You strain to hear voices, footsteps, any sign of who won this deadly game of hide and seek. When your cell door finally opens, it's a guard you don't recognize, his uniform pristine, his face grim. Behind him, other officers are checking cells, counting inmates, making sure everyone is accounted for. The routine of prison life is reasserting itself, but nothing will ever be quite the same. Later you learn the final tally: 2 guards dead, 14 wounded. 3 inmates killed in the fighting, two more destined for the gas chamber. The Battle of Alcatraz is over, but its echoes will haunt the island forever. As you settle back into your routine, you realize something profound about life on the rock. Even in the most secure prison in America, violence is always just one desperate plan away. The bars and walls and armed guards create an illusion of control, but human desperation is a force that no architect can contain. That night, as fog rolls across the island and the normal sounds of prison life resume, you understand that you've witnessed something historians will write about for decades. But for now, it's just another night on Alcatraz, where even the most ordinary day can explode into legend without warning. You're standing in the prison yard on a gray morning in 1937, watching as guards fish another body out of San Francisco Bay. This one made it almost 200 yards from the island before the cold water and currents claimed him. Farther than most, but not nearly far enough. His name was Theodore Cole, and along with Ralph Rowe, he just attempted what prison officials like to call the first serious escape attempt from Alcatraz. But here's what strikes you as you watch the somber recovery operation. This isn't really the first attempt. It's just the first one that made the newspapers. Men have been testing the waters, literally and figuratively, since the day the federal prison opened. Most never even made it off the island. The smart ones realized early that the ocean around Alcatraz isn't just a moat, it's a liquid graveyard. You remember Joe Bowers back in 1936, who thought he could scale the fence during his work detail. The guard in the tower didn't hesitate. One shot, and Bowers fell 40 feet to the rocks below. Not technically a drowning, but the message was clear. The rock doesn't just rely on water to stop escape attempts. It has backup plans. The Cole and Rowe attempt was different, though. These weren't desperate men making impulsive breaks for freedom. They were professionals who studied the problem like engineers examining a blueprint. Ralph Rowe was serving 99 years for bank robbery. He had all the time in the world to plan. Theodore Cole was doing 50 years for kidnapping, and his criminal career showed a talent for thinking several steps ahead. You'd watch them in the machine shop where they both worked, and looking back, the signs were obvious. They spent too much time near the windows that faced the bay. They asked too many questions about tide schedules and weather patterns. They volunteered for cleanup duties that took them close to the water. But the guards saw what they wanted to see: model prisoners adjusting well to prison routine. Here's what made their plan both brilliant and doomed. They chose December 16, 1937, one of the foggiest days in San Francisco Bay history. Visibility was near zero, which meant guards couldn't see them once they entered the water. But the same fog that hid them from pursuers also made navigation impossible. They couldn't see the shore they were swimming toward, couldn't judge distances, couldn't tell if they were making progress or swimming in circles. You piece together their escape route from the investigation that follows. During the lunch break, instead of returning to their cells, they slipped into a utility corridor that housed the island's heating pipes. The pipes were scalding hot. You can see burn marks on the walls where they pressed themselves against concrete to avoid being cooked alive. But the heat also created a kind of chimney effect, drawing air upward and masking any sounds they might have made. From the utility corridor, they crawled through a drainage system that emptied into the bay. It's hard to imagine the claustrophobia of squeezing through pipes barely wide enough for a human body, knowing that getting stuck meant either suffocating or being discovered by guards. But they made it through, emerging at a grate that opened directly onto the rocky shoreline. The water temperature that December day was 46 degrees Fahrenheit. Without wetsuits, which didn't exist yet, they had maybe 15 minutes of useful swimming time before hypothermia set in. After that, their muscles would stop responding, their thinking would become clouded, and the bay would claim them as surely as if they jumped into a pool of ice. You've heard the prison officials' version: both men drowned within minutes of entering the water. Case closed, bodies never recovered. Chalk up another victory for the inescapable prison. But you've also heard the rumors whispered among inmates. that someone saw figures moving in the fog near Angel Island, that a fishing boat reported unusual activity that night, that maybe, just maybe, two desperate men beat the odds. Here's what you know for certain. Their escape triggered the most comprehensive security review in Alcatraz history. Every drainage pipe was sealed or fitted with bars. Every utility corridor got motion sensors. Work details were reduced. And the machine shop, where Cole and Rowe had accessed their escape route, was moved to a more secure location. But the real change was psychological. Before Cole and Rowe, escape from Alcatraz seemed like a fantasy, something desperate men might attempt but never achieve. Their disappearance proved that it was possible to get off the island. Whether you could survive the bay was another question entirely. You notice how this possibility affects the other inmates. There's a new energy in the prison, a sense that the impossible might just be improbable instead. Men start paying closer attention to guard routines, to tide charts, to weather patterns. The machine shop incident planted a seed in the collective prisoner consciousness. If two men could vanish into the fog, maybe others could find different ways to disappear. The guards feel it too. They're more vigilant now, more suspicious of routine activities, more aware that their impenetrable fortress has been breached at least once. Every work detail gets extra scrutiny. Every utility area gets regular inspection. Every foggy day brings heightened anxiety and doubled security. Thomas Lemerick tries it next, in 1938, along with James Lucas and Rufus Franklin. Their plan is more direct: overpower a guard, steal his keys, fight their way to freedom. It doesn't work. Lemerick dies from gunshot wounds. Lucas gets solitary confinement, and Franklin learns that desperation isn't a substitute for planning. Then comes Arthur DeBacher in 1939, Al Capone's old partner, leading a group attempt that ends with Barker dead on the beach, and the other participants nursing gunshot wounds in the prison hospital. Each failure teaches the same lesson: getting off Alcatraz alive requires more than courage. It requires luck, timing, and a plan that accounts for variables no human can fully control. But here's the thing that prison officials don't want to admit. Every failed attempt is also a learning experience for the men still inside. Each mistake gets analyzed. Each weakness gets noted. Each failure gets studied like a textbook in the graduate school of escape artistry. As you watch the fog roll in that evening, you realize something profound about human nature. Impossibility is an invitation, not a deterrent. Tell someone they can't do something, and you've just given them a lifetime project. The men who will eventually succeed at escaping Alcatraz are taking notes right now, learning from Cole and Rowe's courage and their mistakes. The bay keeps its secrets, but the lessons of failure echo through the cell house corridors like whispered prayers of hope. You're working the night shift in the prison library when you first notice something odd about Frank Lee Morris. It's 1960, and Morris has been on Alcatraz for just over a year, but he's already developed a reputation as the smartest inmate in the cell house. Not smart in a bookish way, though he reads voraciously, but smart in the way that makes guards nervous and other prisoners pay attention. Morris is in cell B138, right in the middle of the main cell house, and he's turned his tiny space into something resembling a laboratory. Books on engineering, geology, and maritime navigation crowd his single shelf. He's somehow acquired tide charts for San Francisco Bay, weather pattern studies, and detailed maps that he studies with the intensity of a general planning a military campaign. Here's what you notice that others miss: Morris never asks direct questions about security procedures or escape routes. Instead, he's a master of casual conversation, the kind of inmate who can chat with guards about their families, their hobbies, their off-duty activities, all while mentally cataloging their schedules, their personalities, their potential weaknesses. He's gathering intelligence without anyone realizing they're providing it. You watch him in the prison workshops, where he's developed an almost supernatural ability to acquire tools and materials that should be impossible to obtain. A file disappears from the machine shop inventory. Nobody can prove Morris took it, but somehow he's always nearby when things go missing. Strips of metal, electrical wire, even small amounts of soap vanish into his network of hiding places throughout the prison. The Anglin brothers arrive in 1961, transferred from Atlanta Federal Penitentiary with reputations as escape artists. John and Clarence Anglin had previously escaped from several other prisons, and their presence on Alcatraz sends ripples through both the inmate and guard populations. Everyone knows that putting known escape artists on an escape-proof island is like mixing chemicals in a laboratory. Something interesting is bound to happen. You're assigned to the same work detail as the Anglins, and you quickly realize they're cut from the same cloth as Morris. They're observers, processors, men who see patterns where others see routine. They notice that guard Patterson always checks cell block C before cell block B during night rounds. They observe that the tool inventory in the paint shop is only updated once a week. They memorize the tide schedules and can tell you the exact time of high water for any date in the coming month. But it's when Morris and the Anglins start spending time together that you sense something significant brewing. They're not obvious about it. They never sit together at meals or cluster during exercise periods. Instead, they communicate through the elaborate system of signals and coded conversations that all long-term prisoners develop. A comment about the weather becomes information about guard schedules. A discussion of baseball scores carries data about security procedures. The fourth member of their group is Alan West, a car thief serving his second federal sentence, whose cell is directly above Morris in B138. West isn't as brilliant as the others, but he has something equally valuable, a talent for improvisation and a willingness to take risks that more cautious men might avoid. You start to piece together their plan through careful observation and overheard conversations. They're not just planning an escape, they're engineering one, with the precision of a NASA mission and the creativity of artists. Every element has been thought through, tested, refined, and tested again. The key insight that drives their entire plan is this: Alcatraz's ventilation system is its fatal weakness. The same air shafts that keep the cell house from becoming a concrete tomb also provide a highway for anyone clever enough to exploit them. Morris has spent months studying the building's architectural drawings, somehow obtained from the prison's maintenance files, and he's identified a route from the cell blocks to the roof that bypasses every security checkpoint. Here's the genius of their approach. They're not trying to overpower guards or steal keys or fight their way out. Instead, they're going to literally dig their way to freedom, one spoonful of concrete at a time. The walls of their cells, constructed in the 1930s, are showing their age. The salt air has corroded the reinforcing steel, and the concrete has developed hairline cracks that can be widened with patience and the right tools. You watch Morris work on his cell wall during the long evening lockdowns, using a sharpened spoon handle to chip away at the concrete around the ventilation grate. The work is tedious, almost meditative. Scrape, brush away dust, scrape again. He times his work to coincide with the prison's noisiest periods, when the heating system kicks on, when other inmates are exercising, when the foghorns are blowing outside. The Anglins are doing identical work in their cells, B150 and B52, while West attacks his wall above them. Each man has developed his own technique for hiding the growing holes behind their ventilation grates. Morris uses cardboard painted to look like concrete. The Anglins employ a mixture of soap, toilet paper, and gray paint that perfectly matches the wall color. West uses magazines and newspapers arranged to create the illusion of an intact grate, but the wall work is just the beginning of their plan. Once they break through to the utility corridor behind their cells, they'll need to navigate a maze of pipes and air shafts to reach the roof. From there, they'll have to descend the outside wall of the prison, cross the island to the water, and somehow survive a mile and a half swim through some of the most dangerous currents on the Pacific coast. Each element requires specialized equipment that doesn't exist in a maximum security prison. So they're making it from scratch, transforming everyday items into escape gear with ingenuity that would impress MacGyver. Raincoats become life jackets. Hair tonic and soap become glue. Magazine covers become camouflage. You realize you're witnessing something unprecedented, a perfect storm of intelligence, determination, an opportunity that might just be enough to crack the code of America's most secure prison. Morris has the brains, the Anglins have the experience, West has the recklessness, and together they have something no previous escape attempt possessed. Unlimited time and absolute commitment to seeing their plan through to completion. As you watch them work night after night, month after month, you understand that they're not just planning an escape. They're preparing for the most famous disappearing act in American criminal history. You're lying in your cell at 2 a.m., listening to the soft scraping sounds that have become as regular as the fog horns outside. For months now, you've been aware of the methodical work happening in cells B138 and B150, but night 52 tonight feels different. There's an urgency to the sounds, a sense that something long in preparation is finally reaching completion. Frank Morris has perfected his technique for creating dummy heads, and watching him work is like observing a master sculptor. Using toilet paper as his base material, he builds up the basic skull shape, then covers it with a mixture of soap and toothpaste that hardens into something resembling skin. Real hair, collected from the prison barbershop floor over months, gets carefully glued in place strand by strand. The attention to detail is extraordinary. Morris studies his own reflection in the small mirror above his sink, noting the exact angle of his hairline, the way his ears sit against his head, even the subtle shadows cast by his nose and cheekbones. The dummy head he creates isn't just a decoy. It's a work of art that could fool anyone glancing into his cell during the night guard's flashlight checks. You watch the Anglin brothers working on their own creations, and you're amazed by how they've divided the labor. John handles the hair collection and styling, somehow managing to match his brother's distinctive reddish-brown color. Clarence focuses on the facial features, using bits of paint scraped from various prison surfaces to create realistic skin tones. Both men work with the patience of monks illuminating manuscripts, understanding that a single obvious flaw could doom their entire plan. Alan West struggles more with his dummy head, and you can see the frustration in his movements. His hands aren't as steady as the others, his artistic sense not as refined, but he compensates with determination, rebuilding his creation multiple times until it meets the group's exacting standards. In a plan where everything must work perfectly, there's no room for mediocrity. Here's what impresses you most: the improvised tools they've created for their escape. Morris has fashioned a drill from a modified vacuum cleaner motor, somehow acquired from the prison's maintenance shop. The bit is made from a sharpened metal spoon, and the whole contraption is small enough to hide inside a hollowed-out book. When he needs to enlarge the hole in his cell wall, the drill makes quick work of concrete that would take hours to chip away by hand. The life preservers are masterpieces of prison engineering. Using raincoats stolen from the prison laundry, they've created inflatable vests that can be worn under their clothing. The seams are sealed with contact cement made from rubber heels dissolved in gasoline, both items mysteriously missing from the cobbler shop inventory. When inflated, each vest can theoretically keep a man afloat for hours in the frigid waters of San Francisco Bay. But the crown jewel of their equipment is the raft itself. You've watched them work on it during stolen moments in the prison industries building, where they have access to larger spaces and better tools. The raft is constructed from over 50 raincoats, carefully selected for durability and stitched together with thread unraveled from prison blankets. When fully inflated, it's designed to carry 4 men across the treacherous currents between Alcatraz and the Marin shoreline. The paddles are carved from pieces of wood scavenged throughout the prison. A piece of shelving here, a broken mop handle there. Each paddle is shaped and balanced by hand, then painted with shoe polish to reduce their visibility against the dark water. Morris tests them in the industrial sink during his work detail, adjusting the blade angle for maximum efficiency. You're amazed by how they've solved the inflation problem. Without access to pumps or compressed air, They've created a manual inflation system using modified accordion cases from the prison band room. By squeezing the cases repeatedly, they can force air into their improvised flotation devices, though the process will require precious minutes when every second counts. Here's something that would terrify the prison administrators if they knew. The escapees have conducted extensive research on San Francisco Bay's currents and weather patterns. Morris has somehow obtained copies of Coast Guard navigation charts, which he studies like a sea captain planning a voyage. He knows that the tide changes every 6 hours, that the strongest currents flow during the first 2 hours after high tide, and that their best chance for survival requires entering the water at exactly the right moment. The timing of their escape has been calculated down to the minute. They need a night when the tide is ebbing toward the Marin shore, when fog provides cover but isn't so thick as to cause complete disorientation, and when the guard rotation provides the longest possible window between cell checks. Morris has identified only 12 nights per year when all conditions align favorably. You watch them practice their routine during the evening lockdowns, moving through the motions of their escape like dancers rehearsing choreography. Each man knows exactly what he must do and when he must do it. Morris will go first, clearing the path and testing each stage of the route. The Anglins will follow, carrying the raft components and paddles. West will bring up the rear, sealing their exit holes to delay discovery. The psychological preparation is as important as the physical. You can see how they've mentally detached themselves from prison life, viewing Alcatraz not as their home but as a temporary obstacle to overcome. They speak less frequently with other inmates, participate minimally in prison activities, and spend their free time studying maps and weather reports rather than socializing. But here's what you find most remarkable: their absolute confidence that the plan will work. These aren't desperate men making a suicide run for freedom. They're professionals executing a carefully calculated operation. Morris has run scenarios in his head hundreds of times, accounting for variables from guard behavior to ocean conditions. The Anglins have escape experience from multiple prisons, and they've never encountered a barrier they couldn't eventually overcome. As you listen to the final preparations happening in the cells around you, you realize you're witnessing history in the making. Whether they succeed or fail, these 4 men are about to attempt something that will become legend, a story that will be told and retold for generations to come. The scraping sounds stop, and in the sudden silence, you can almost feel the weight of anticipation settling over the cell house like fog. You're lying in your bunk on the evening of June 11, 1962, and the air feels different tonight. There's an electricity in the cell house, a tension that makes your skin prickle despite the cool fog rolling in from the bay. In the cells around you, 250 men are settling into their usual evening routines, but 4 of them are about to make history. The 9:30 p.m. lights out bell rings as it has every night for decades. But tonight that familiar sound marks the beginning of the most audacious prison break in American history. You listen as the cell house settles into its normal rhythm. Guards completing their final rounds, inmates shifting on their bunks, the building itself cooling and contracting with small creaks and sighs. At exactly 10:00 p.m., Officer Bill Long makes his routine check of the main cell house. His flashlight beam sweeps across the cells methodically, pausing briefly at each barred door to verify that every inmate is accounted for. The beam illuminates what appears to be Frank Morris sleeping peacefully in cell B on 138, his familiar profile visible against the pillow. In B150 and B52, the Anglin brothers seem equally settled for the night, but you know what Officer Long doesn't. Those aren't men sleeping in those cells. They're masterfully crafted dummy heads, positioned perfectly to fool a flashlight check from the corridor. The real Morris and the Anglin brothers are already gone, vanished through holes in their cell walls that took months to create and moments to use. Here's how it unfolded at 9:35 p.m., just 5 minutes after lights out. Morris removed the false grate from his ventilation opening and squeezed through the hole he'd spent 18 months enlarging. The opening is barely wide enough for a human body, and getting through requires exhaling completely and twisting like a contortionist. But Morris has practiced this movement hundreds of times in his mind, and his body follows the memorized sequence perfectly. You can almost see him emerging into the utility corridor behind the cells, a narrow space filled with pipes and electrical conduits that most people would find claustrophobic. But to Morris, this cramped tunnel represents freedom, the first stage of a journey that will either end in escape or death, but definitely won't end in a prison cell. The Anglin brothers follow the same route from their cells, each man carrying carefully bundled sections of their homemade raft. The equipment they've created over months of patient work must now be transported through spaces barely large enough for their bodies. Every movement must be silent, every breath controlled, because the utility corridor runs directly behind occupied cells where the slightest sound could alert sleeping inmates. Above them, Alan West is struggling with his ventilation grate, while the others have been systematically weakening their cell walls. West has fallen behind in his preparation. The concrete around his opening is still too thick, too resistant to his makeshift tools. As his co-conspirators move through the utility corridor below, West is frantically scraping at his wall, knowing that every minute costs him his chance at freedom. Morris leads the group through the utility corridor to a vertical ventilation shaft that rises 3 stories to the cell house roof. This is where months of study pay off. He knows exactly which pipes can bear a man's weight, which electrical cables to avoid, how to navigate in complete darkness through a maze that would confuse most people in broad daylight. The climb is treacherous. You can imagine them pulling themselves up through the shaft, their prison-issued shoes struggling for purchase on smooth metal surfaces, their hands cramped from gripping pipes and cable housings. The air is thick with dust and the smell of decades-old grease, and every sound echoes ominously in the confined space. Here's what makes their route so brilliant. They're traveling through the one part of Alcatraz that guards never patrol. The utility areas behind and above the cells are considered inaccessible to inmates, so they're monitored only by occasional maintenance checks. Morris has timed their escape to avoid the weekly inspection schedule, giving them a clear path to the roof. At the top of the ventilation shaft, they encounter their biggest physical challenge, a large fan that blocks their access to the roof. This isn't something they could have tested during their planning phase. They had to trust that their intelligence about the fan's construction was accurate, that the bolts holding it in place could be removed with the tools they'd managed to acquire. Working by feel in absolute darkness, Morris begins dismantling the fan assembly. Each bolt must be carefully removed and set aside. If one falls into the shaft below, the sound could alert guards throughout the building. The work is painstakingly slow, but eventually the fan assembly comes free, opening their passage to the outside world. You can picture the moment when Morris first emerges onto the cell house roof, breathing free air for the first time in years. Behind him, John and Clarence Anglin follow, carrying the components of their escape raft and the life preservers that will either save their lives or become their burial shrouds. The roof of Alcatraz presents its own challenges. They're now visible to guards in the surrounding towers, so they must move carefully, staying in shadows and timing their movements to avoid searchlight sweeps. The fog provides some cover, but it also makes navigation treacherous on the rain-slicked concrete surfaces. Their next obstacle is getting down from the roof to ground level, a descent of nearly 50 feet down the outside wall of the prison. For this, they've prepared improvised ropes made from electrical cord and bed sheets, tested for strength but never under the conditions they're about to face. One by one, they rappel down the prison wall, their hands burning from the friction of makeshift ropes, their bodies pressed against concrete that's still warm from the day's sun. Each man knows that a slip here means certain death on the rocks below, but they also know that hesitation means capture and a return to cells they'll never leave alive. As they touch down on the rocky shore of Alcatraz Island, Morris and the Anglin brothers have accomplished something no one thought possible. They've broken out of America's most secure prison. But they've only completed the first phase of their plan. Ahead lies the most dangerous part of their journey, a 1.5-mile swim through frigid waters that have claimed the lives of stronger swimmers than they. Behind them, Alan West is still struggling with his ventilation grate, fighting desperately against concrete that refuses to yield. His window of opportunity is closing with each passing minute, and soon he'll have to make the devastating decision that will haunt him for the rest of his life: stay and live, or follow his friends into the darkness and almost certain death. You're standing on the rocky shore of Alcatraz Island at 11:30 p.m., and the fog has transformed the bay into an alien landscape. San Francisco's lights flicker dimly through the mist like distant stars, and the water stretches before you like a black mirror that reflects nothing. This is the moment of truth, where months of planning meet the brutal reality of San Francisco Bay's icy waters. Frank Morris kneels on the rocks, carefully assembling the sections of their homemade raft. His hands work with practiced precision despite the cold and the adrenaline coursing through his system. The raincoat material feels fragile in the salt air, and every connection point represents a potential failure that could doom all three men. But there's no time for doubt now. Behind them, Alcatraz sits like a sleeping giant that could wake at any moment. The Anglin brothers are inflating their life preservers using the modified accordion cases, squeezing air into the improvised flotation devices with a rhythm that sounds almost musical in the fog-muffled silence. Each squeeze forces precious air into their survival gear, but the process is taking longer than anticipated. The cases weren't designed for this kind of work, and the valves they've created from stolen materials are temperamental at best. Here's what strikes you about this moment: the absolute silence of the bay. No boat engines, no foghorns, no sounds of civilization, just the gentle lap of waves against rocks and the whispered conversations of three desperate men. The fog has created a world within a world, isolating them as completely as prison walls ever did. As they work, you can sense the weight of what they're attempting. The water temperature is 54 degrees Fahrenheit, cold enough to kill an unprepared swimmer in 30 minutes. The currents around Alcatraz are legendary for their strength and unpredictability, capable of pulling even strong swimmers far out to sea or dashing them against the rocks of nearby islands. Morris checks the tide chart he's memorized, calculating their best route based on current flow and timing. They need to enter the water at the exact moment when the ebbing tide will carry them toward the Marin shore rather than out to the Pacific Ocean. Too early, and they'll be swept toward the Golden Gate Bridge and the open ocean. Too late, and the changing tide will drive them back toward Alcatraz or onto the rocky shores of Angel Island. The raft finally takes shape, a gray ghost of rubberized fabric that looks impossibly fragile for the journey ahead. It's larger than you expected, roughly 6 feet by 4 feet when fully inflated, designed to carry 3 men and their makeshift paddles across one of the most dangerous stretches of water on the Pacific coast. You watch as they test the raft's stability in the shallow water near shore. It floats, but barely, sitting low in the water and responding sluggishly to their movements. This isn't a professionally manufactured life raft. It's a desperate improvisation made from stolen materials by men who had no choice but to make it work or die trying. The moment of launch is both anticlimactic and terrifying. There's no dramatic speech, no final look back at the prison that held them for years. Morris simply pushes the raft into deeper water and climbs aboard, followed by John and Clarence Anglin. The raft sags under their combined weight, and water begins seeping through seams that were sealed with contact cement and prayer. Here's what you realize as you watch them paddle into the fog. They're not just escaping from prison. They're disappearing from history. Within moments, the mist swallows them completely, and they become shadows moving through a gray void where normal rules of physics and navigation don't apply. They could be heading toward freedom or death, and there's no way to know which until morning. The current catches them almost immediately, and you can see them struggling to maintain their chosen direction as the bay's powerful forces try to dictate their route. The paddles they carved by hand are inadequate for the job. Too small, too light, too crude for the massive forces they're fighting against. But they're all the escapees have, and they use them with the desperation of men who understand that stopping means sinking. Through the fog, you catch glimpses of their progress, or lack thereof. The raft moves in slow, erratic patterns, sometimes seeming to make headway toward the marine shore, sometimes appearing to drift sideways or even backward. The men aboard are soaked within minutes, their body heat bleeding away into the cold air and colder water. What you can't see but can imagine is the conversation aboard that tiny raft. Are they encouraging each other, sharing navigational observations, making contingency plans? Or are they silent, each man focused entirely on the physical demands of survival, too cold and too frightened to waste energy on words? The fog begins to thin slightly as they move away from the island, and you catch one final glimpse of the raft. A small dark shape riding low in the water, 3 figures hunched over their paddles, moving slowly but steadily toward whatever fate awaits them in the darkness. Then the mist closes in again, and they're gone as completely as if they'd never existed. Behind you, Alcatraz continues its normal routine, unaware that 3 of its most dangerous prisoners are no longer in their cells. The guards make their rounds, the searchlights sweep their predetermined patterns, and the prison maintains its reputation as the most secure facility in America. But something fundamental has changed. The myth of absolute security has been shattered by 3 men with dummy heads and a raft made from raincoats. As the hours pass and the fog slowly lifts, you find yourself staring at the empty water and wondering, did they make it? Are Morris and the Anglin brothers somewhere on the marine shore right now, shedding their prison uniforms and beginning new lives with new identities? Or are their bodies drifting with the tide, another tribute to the bay that has claimed so many others who tried to cheat Alcatraz? The beautiful, terrible truth is that you may never know. They've achieved something no previous escape attempt managed. They've created a perfect mystery. A story with no ending, a question that will haunt investigators and captivate the public for decades to come. In the growing light of dawn, all that remains of the most famous prison break in American history is an empty raft found washed ashore on Angel Island, and 3 cells with dummy heads that fooled the guards for 8 precious hours. Everything else, the men, their fate, their ultimate success or failure, has vanished into legend. You're standing in the empty corridors of Alcatraz on March 20, 1963, and the silence is deafening. For 29 years, these walls contained America's most dangerous criminals, but now they hold only shadows and memories. The great experiment is over, and the rock is closing its doors forever. The decision came from Washington, delivered in the bureaucratic language that reduces human drama to budget line items. Alcatraz Federal Penitentiary costs too much to operate, requires too much maintenance, generates too many problems for the small number of inmates it houses. The accounting is cold and simple. $10 per day per prisoner at the federal facilities versus $35 per day per prisoner on the rock. Mathematics has defeated what bullets and currents could not. You watch the final inmates being processed out, their few possessions packed into manila envelopes that seem pitifully small for lives that have been compressed into such narrow spaces. Some of these men have spent decades on Alcatraz, and they're leaving as different people than they were when they arrived. Older, grayer, broken in ways that go deeper than physical scars. Al Capone is long gone, released in 1939 to die slowly of syphilis in his Florida mansion. Robert Stroud, the so-called Birdman, was transferred to the Medical Center for Federal Prisoners in Springfield, Missouri, where he'll spend his remaining years, still believing his ornithological expertise should have earned him freedom. The legends are departing or already departed, leaving behind only stories and the fading echoes of their presence. Here's what strikes you most powerfully: Alcatraz never lived up to its promise of being truly escape-proof. Frank Morris and the Anglin brothers proved that with enough intelligence, patience, and desperation, even the rock could be cracked. Their escape didn't just embarrass the Bureau of Prisons. It shattered the psychological foundation that made Alcatraz work. Once inmates believed escape was possible, the prison's greatest weapon was neutralized. The families are leaving too, packing up lives that were shaped by this strange isolation. Children who grew up in the shadow of maximum security are moving to normal neighborhoods where their playgrounds won't be surrounded by armed guards. Parents who spent years living next door to the country's most dangerous criminals are discovering what it feels like to have neighbors who aren't locked in cells at night. You walk through the empty cell house one final time, your footsteps echoing off concrete walls that have heard everything. Screams, prayers, confessions, plans, dreams, and the quiet desperation of men with nothing left to lose. The cells stand open now, their doors swung wide like mouths gasping for air after decades of holding their breath. In cell B138, Frank Morris's former home, you can still see faint marks where he worked patiently on the ventilation grate that became his gateway to legend. The dummy head is gone, confiscated as evidence in an investigation that never found definitive answers. But the spirit of his achievement lingers in the empty space, like a ghost made of determination and ingenuity. The kitchen that served as headquarters for so many escape plots is being stripped of its equipment. The enormous stoves and industrial ovens loaded onto barges for transport to other federal facilities. The dining hall where 250 men ate in enforced silence is empty now, its long tables removed. Its acoustic properties no longer needed to amplify the sounds of captivity. Here's what the closing of Alcatraz represents beyond bureaucratic efficiency. The end of an era when America believed that the worst criminals could be made to disappear, locked away on an island where society didn't have to think about them. The reality proved more complicated. You can't make problems vanish by isolating them. You can only postpone the day when they demand to be addressed. The guards are scattering to new assignments at federal prisons across the country, carrying with them expertise in handling the most difficult inmates. Some will miss the camaraderie of working in such an intense environment, the sense that they were part of something unique and historically important. Others are relieved to be leaving behind the constant tension, the knowledge that they were always outnumbered by men who had nothing left to lose. As the final boat pulls away from the dock, carrying the last personnel and equipment from Alcatraz, you realize you're witnessing something profound. The transformation of a place from active reality to permanent legend. Tomorrow, tourists will start asking questions about visiting the empty prison. Within years, it will become one of San Francisco's most popular attractions, its cells preserved as monuments to a harsher era of American justice. But here's the beautiful irony of Alcatraz's transformation. By closing as a prison, it achieves a kind of immortality that no successful penitentiary could ever attain. The rock becomes frozen in time at the moment of its greatest mystery, forever associated with the three men who may or may not have beaten the unbeatable system. The fog rolls in that evening as it has every evening for centuries, wrapping the empty island in its familiar gray embrace. But now the fog isn't hiding guards and prisoners, escape attempts and security patrols. It's preserving a story, maintaining the mystery that makes Alcatraz eternally fascinating rather than simply forgotten. In the years to come, millions of visitors will walk these corridors, stand in these cells, and wonder about the men who lived and died, and sometimes vanished within these walls. They'll ask the same questions that have no definitive answers. Did Morris and the Anglins survive their desperate swim to freedom? Are they somewhere out there, living under assumed names, laughing about the greatest prison break in American history? Or did the cold waters of San Francisco Bay claim them as it claimed so many others? The closing of Alcatraz doesn't end these questions, it makes them eternal. By shutting down as a prison, the rock achieves something far more powerful than successful incarceration. It becomes the keeper of perfect mysteries, the guardian of stories that can never be fully told because their endings remain hidden in fog and time and the endless, patient waters of the bay. The fog drifts gently across the water now, soft and welcoming, wrapping around the island like a blanket that's been warmed by the sun. Your breathing has grown deeper, more peaceful, as the stories settle into that quiet place where dreams begin to form. You can almost feel yourself floating on those gentle waters, supported not by fear or cold, but by the warmth of human courage and the endless possibility that lives in every heart that refuses to give up hope. The waves rock you gently, their rhythm as comforting as a lullaby, carrying you toward shores of rest and peace. The questions that haunted Alcatraz have softened now into something beautiful, not mysteries that torment, but stories that comfort, reminding us that the human spirit finds ways to soar even when surrounded by the highest walls. Whether Morris and the Anglins found their freedom in the physical world or simply in the courage to try, they gave us something precious, proof that hope is the one thing that no prison, no matter how secure, can ever truly contain. As you drift towards sleep, let their courage become your comfort, their determination your peace. Some stories don't need endings to be complete. They just need dreamers to keep them alive, floating gently through the fog of memory like boats that never quite reach shore but never stop sailing toward the light. Sleep well, and dream of open water, of fog that conceals and protects, of three men who disappeared into legend and found a different kind of freedom there. The bay is calm tonight, and all its secrets rest softly in the mist, waiting to whisper you into peaceful dreams.